Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and happy Tuesday to everybody. I'm going to be talking today about communications of your generative AI strategy. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is that I see a lot of organizations doing a lot of things with generative AI, but they're not communicating what they're doing, either internally to their employees or externally to their customers and their stakeholders and shareholders and partners. So I really want to make sure that everyone is thinking about how to not just put a strategy together, but also how to communicate it. And in particular, we're going to talk about how to build a movement around your generative AI strategy. So to begin with today, I would love for you to share how are you currently communicating your generative AI strategy, both internally and externally? So again, I love this audience. You all are lots of good practitioners here. So please share what you are doing, especially to communicate what you are doing with generative AI. So let's get started today. I do have some slides to share with you, and I'll put these into the comments too as well. And let's see, here we go. And we also have Jay. Hello, Jay Bryant. I'm coming from Rockford, Illinois, and Jay is usually my person who puts these things into LinkedIn too as well. So thank you, Jay, for doing that. So let me get into the slides here. So one of the things I really want to focus on today is, first of all, why it is so important to communicate what's going on with your generative AI strategy. And one of the biggest issues that I see is that if people are not clear on what you're trying to do. So what are you trying to do with generative AI, both internally and externally? Last week, we had Sami Hassaneh from AARP talking about the importance of having a strategy, building a culture. And one of the things he talked about, just very lightly, but I talked about it with him more extensively in my interviews with him, is how important it is to create that alignment and constantly communicating to people what we are doing, what we're trying to achieve, and really elevating what they're doing from just tasks and automation and use cases to driving growth amongst AARP and its members. So the key thing here is that if value is being delivered but no one knows about it, then it's as if it doesn't exist. I think about it as a tree falling in the forest. If no one's there to hear about it or witness it, no one's going to know it's there. So communicating not only the strategy, but also what's working and what isn't is really important. And I almost put as much importance on the communicating as the actual value that's being created. And I really want to emphasize this. You could do all the great work in the world, but if you do not want to give credit or take credit for the work that's being done, also be accountable for what isn't, then it's not going to go anywhere. And people are going to wonder, what are you doing with generative AI? We know something's happening over there. There's some skunk works happening, or there's some strategy, or we heard through the rumor mill that some executives are really focused on this, but everyone else is just sort of left trying to figure out what's going on. And the reality is that generative AI is a highly transformative force. And so the way you approach it and the way you communicate it has to be also very different. There is a tremendous amount of fear, of uncertainty, and doubt. And therefore, you need to create this container, to create this space where people can think about it, talk about it, put it on, try it out, and know that, yes, this feels really risky and it's really hard, but there's also a very strong benefit that comes out of it. So when I think about communicating, I do think about having to build a movement. Now, for those of you who have been following me for a few years, you know that my last book, The Disruption Mindset, was all about creating movements with your leadership. And I think this can't is not it is so true when it comes to generative AI. And we have to think about the transformational force that generative AI is and not treat it like a traditional change management situation. Traditional change management says you identify what the change is, you communicate, you bring people along, you basically encourage them, you give them training, and there's follow-up and accountability. All of that is true when it comes to generative AI. and yet there's something extra on top of it. There is a tremendous amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And you have to overcome that. You have to be aware that that is there, that it is this really big block of resistance because it is highly threatening. It is very disruptive. People don't understand it. They hear all this terrible news and doomsday that AI is going to take over the world, or at least it's going to take over your job. And so, how to communicate this is really crucial. And I do believe that building a movement as the foundation for your communication strategy is absolutely essential. And here's the thing that's tricky. Unlike most communication strategies, you don't control movements, you inspire them. And that is a very different activity and mindset than traditional communications. Communications traditionally, especially coming from marketing and PR, is all about controlling the message. And when you're creating a movement, it's just the opposite. You're creating a message, but you're creating an idea, a transformation that takes on a life of its own. So you can put some parameters on it, but it would take its own shape. So you have to inspire people to come to this movement, to come to this transformation, because I can tell you, having seen and guided multiple transformations over the past few decades, they do not happen unless you build this movement. And the most powerful movements are the ones that you are not at the very front leading the charge. It's when it takes on a life of its own and other people step up to become the leaders of that movement. So I do want to pause and just see if there are any questions, first of all. And let me just put, yep, the slides are up here. So just see if there are any questions at all. By all means, put your comments and thoughts into the chat. I'll get to as many of them as I can. But in the meantime, let me keep going on the 4 steps and ways to create a movement and a communication strategy for your generative AI efforts. All right, let's go back to the slides. The first one is to tell the strategy as a story. This is coming from one of my mentors, Roger Martin, who was the past head of the business school at Rotman at University of Toronto. And I worked with him at Monitor Group, and I love the way he thinks about strategy. And he oftentimes says that strategy, again, this is what I talked about a few weeks ago, that strategy is simply not just planning, but it's deciding where you're going to play and how you're going to win. And then you tell that strategy as a story. Because if you have strategy in a deck and slides and PowerPoint, or even as a piece of paper, people can read it and they don't remember it, but they remember stories. So if you can create an arc of a story, and I put a story arc example here. Again, there's a beginning, middle, and end. There's something that's happening here, an exciting incident. There's a climax to the story, and then eventually there's a resolution. And so the more you have these story arcs to talk about, here is our situation today. We are not growing, or we could be growing at a better speed. There's this movement of generative AI, and it's uncertain what's going to happen. But we do believe we have this vision of how we're going to succeed. And here's the challenges that we're going to overcome, the barriers we're going to have to face and pull together and really realize that value, and we'll see the impact in our customers and in the marketplace. So when you can have this challenge and this story of how we're going to come together and build something and overcome these barriers, that's something that people can rally around. They can understand that this is not going to be a smooth walk. It's going to be difficult, but the reward at the end of that journey is going to be meaningful. So, really create this compelling vision of where you want to end up. Tell the story about the journey, align it with your mission and values, and make sure you're very transparent about what the challenges are, the limitations, but also the possibilities. And then this is a very important part. I do believe that stories isn't just one singular story. The best stories, especially with these visions and creating a movement, is when you create a narrative. It's basically the bare bones of the narrative of how that arc is going to travel. But then you allow people to create their own stories. And stories become most powerful when they make it their own. They take it to their circumstance and they put their own experiences on top of that narrative. I work in customer service, one person might say. And this is the journey that I went on. It was hard. I didn't trust generative AI. I learned how to use it. And oh my goodness, the things I discovered along the way. So when people can put their own stories on top of the general narrative that you are creating around your generative AI strategy, it becomes incredibly powerful because that story becomes their own. And that's the beginning of that movement. And so this is a really tricky place because oftentimes we want to control the narrative, we want to control what people are doing. And so this is really important as well. So I have a couple comments here. So we have Jay Bryant sharing. Internally, we communicate with my partners almost daily. Externally, we're showing our customers how we are using AI tools with our work. Thank you for sharing that, Jay. I would love to hear just some of the ways that you're communicating with people internally. Again, anybody can share this, but how do you do it? Because it can get kind of dulled up if you communicate it constantly. How do you make it stand out? How do you get people to pay attention? Especially if this is a constant drumbeat of updates. Jay Johnson, I love my two J's, says non communication is communication. It conveys uncertainty, honesty, enthusiasm, empowerment, engaged stakeholders. So Jay's making a great point. If you don't say anything, that's saying something. So you're much better off being able to come and explain to people this is what's going on. Yes, this is hard. Generative AI is very uncertain. We don't know what the story is going to look like. We don't know exactly what that path is going to be, but we're going to go on this path. So that's my first step is talking about strategy, having a vision as a story as you're putting things together. So let me talk about the second step, and that is to start with your leadership. Now, this is a really important part because this has a lot to do with who you're going to have. One of the things I love about building movements is to identify your first followers. And so identifying your champions and your first followers, the ones who are going to take on the mantle of leadership and then move forward. Now, I don't even imagine that the vast majority of all of your leaders will be those first followers and champions of this movement. But a few of them will, and the others will follow them. And so it is so important to spread the leadership of this movement to as many other leaders as possible. But you also may find some other people on the front lines who also want to take on and being a champion. So finding these first followers, identifying them, giving them the support, and also the air cover that every single member of your leadership team is going to be trained on generative AI, how to use it, what the benefits are, and the strategy, and also give them training on how to talk about the strategy. Again, as a narrative, as a story. And then very importantly, get their commitment. Now that can look like a lot of different ways. That can come from them just saying, I'm going to be supportive and not stand in the way. But it could be more proactive in that they may say, I'm going to take on a few of these experiments. We're going to find ways to create value in my organization, in my teams, in my department, and we're going to start experimenting with that way. And again, having that air cover of everybody else in the company doing this at the same time creates this sense that, okay, we're all in this together. We're going on this journey. We're going to embark on this uncertain path, and we're going to support and hold each other accountable that we're going to keep making progress in this way. So I do not pretend that this is an easy step. Getting your leadership aligned around anything is difficult. And this is, again, a question of priorities. Is generative AI in your top 3 to 5 priorities over the next few years? Because that is what the timeline that is that you're looking at. This is not a 3-month endeavor that you pay attention to, put a big hurrah behind, and then let it fester. It is something that you're committing to, and you believe that generative AI is going to be a significant transformative force in your organization. So that's where that becomes, again, this is all part of your leadership. And the next part, the third part here, is really thinking about how to empathize and engage the rest of your organization. And here is a very important thing. You have to empathize with the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD that exists within the organization. And what's really helpful is to create these constant feedback loops so that people feel like they're being heard, their concerns, their activities, the trouble that they're having, putting their heads and minds and hands around generative AI. I remember when Adobe was going through their transformation 10 years ago, moving from CD-ROMs to being a cloud-based company. And one of the things they did was to have these constant feedback and group meetings amongst all of their employees. They realized this was highly stressful for people, that they needed a place and they needed to be heard. And so this was a two-way communication. It wasn't just ability for them to just lodge complaints. Senior management would show up at these meetings, hear all the concerns, hear the direct challenges to what's going on, and be able to address them with honesty, empathy, and transparency. So, also very important, something that Adobe did is that there was a very strong sense of we're moving forward. I remember that the top executives, especially the CFO, saying, "We burnt the boats," meaning we're moving forward. The only way we're going to survive, this is from Alexander the Great. He said, "We're going to," the first thing they did when they landed in Persia, Alexander the Great and his armies, and they were greatly outnumbered 5-1. He ordered the boats to be destroyed. And his soldiers said, "Well, what's going to happen if we don't lose? If we lose, we have no form of retreat." And he goes, "We will sail back in our enemy's ships to home, or we will die trying." So this is sort of that sense that we have to move forward. There's no going back. We would love to retreat, but this is the reality of the future. We have to get our minds and our heads and our hands around all of this. And we have to keep moving forward. So I really love this example I want to give, and I have the traffic light as a reminder. And this one organization, this one CEO said, "We're going to go move forward. We're going to become a generative AI first company, AI first, AI ready. And so everyone is going to get trained. Here's a whole list of all the activities and models that you can use. Here's training. You get budgets to go figure this out. We encourage it. And every single employee is going to have a light next to their name. And there'll be green light if they're actively using these tools, a yellow light if they're figuring it out. They're still trying to absorb it, but they're in the tools and they're using it. They just may not be using it all the time. And you get a red light if you are not doing anything at all." And then he laid a line, he drew a line in the sand. And he said, in 6 months, there will be no more red lights working at this company. And he basically said, he put it on the table to say, we are going to embrace this technology. We don't know all the ins and outs of it yet, but the only way we're going to get there is to figure it out, to use it. So he put it in imperative that everybody in the organization get their hands into it, start using it, and figuring it out. So no more red lights at the company in 6 months. And this is a very important thing, because if you're building a movement, how committed are you as a leader, as an organization, to go on this journey? Now, you may not want to make it as extreme as that, but what are the expectations? How do you want people to participate and show up? And again, empathize, but also engage people, acknowledge how hard it is, and set realistic expectations, but be very clear on your expectations of how you want people to be moving into this journey and how you want them to participate. All right. I'll come back to the comments in just a second. Again, please put all your comments, ideas, questions into the chat, and we'll deal with that right after I do this. All right. The last slide, I believe. Yes, it is the last slide. Okay. Number 4, relentlessly communicate. And the reason I say this is that it is often so easy to think, I've said it once and everyone's heard it. And the reality is we get busy with the things that we're doing every day, with our to-do lists. And I go back to the former CEO of LinkedIn, Jeffrey Weiner, and he would always begin every single meeting with a recitation of the mission and values of LinkedIn. And then he would point out a key point of the strategy or a value. He would emphasize that for the purpose of that meeting. And he did this at every single meeting. And one person asked him, "So, when are you going to stop doing this? Because we're sick and tired of hearing you say it all the time." And he said something very wise. He said, "I'll stop doing it when people stop looking surprised." And then this is the reality is if you're driving change, driving a transformation, trying to create a movement, you need to constantly remind people this is the journey we're on. Tell that story again, briefly, but tell the story and the vision of where you want to be and remind people of their role in making that a reality. That never ends. And the minute you think it's not needed anymore is the minute your movement will start dying on the vine. So keep everyone informed. Use the town halls, use roadshows, use videos, use all the different tools available to you. And do not fear that you sound like a broken record. Because every time you share another success story, every time you talk about a challenge that needs to be overcome, every time you are transparent about what's working and what isn't, it gives people a reminder and an update of why they're doing this, why we're going on this journey, why it's worth it. And so, one of the ways to ease the burden of this is you can use generative AI to create a lot of these assets. And also, this is so important. You want to democratize the participation around the communication, allow people to speak and tell their stories. And so, if you can imagine this diffusion of that power to communicate, no longer having to need to control the message because you've just created a narrative, then it allows people to say the things, all the good things, all the challenges, whatever it is that you want to talk about, that people want to talk about and share their experiences. All of that is good because it shows the struggle and also the successes of what's not working and what is working. So there's nothing to fear from it. The biggest thing you don't want to have happen is that no one's talking about it. So invite the openness and the dialogue because it is, again, truly transformational, and transformations never happen perfectly in a complete timeline, budget, and in an orderly way. It is messy. It is wonderfully, disastrously, sometimes invigorating, but it is something that you can hold on to say we continue to make progress. So that's what I have for today. I do want to share and see if there's any other questions here. Let's see. The Jay again just reinforces this point that a key differentiator is that communication is two-way. Absolutely, that's a great point to emphasize. Ram has here the compete to be unique and have a unique story to back it up. Absolutely, this is your unique organization, your unique vision, and your unique mission and values that are to is very special to the specific organization. So use those things to create this unique story that only you in the organization, as an organization, can tell each other and to others. Let's see. A bunch of other comments here. Here's also another comment. It's also helpful to talk about objectives and how it fits into the company purpose. And again, I love this because, and also the person writes that it's a few successful pilot results are also very compelling. This is, I think, a very important point to make that when you can do these two things of aligning the story against your existing mission and your purpose and your objectives, it becomes a continuous story. It's not a new story. And again, I keep talking about a generative AI strategy that's laid on top of your existing strategy to be coherent, to be clear that it's supporting your existing objectives. So that's really important, but it's also very important to highlight all of these new areas. So thinking big about your strategy, starting small with these use cases, and then scaling very quickly with this movement building. So let's see. And then two other quick comments. Jay, love this focus on the general artificial intelligence can focus on the what, so stakers can focus on the why. So this is one of the biggest challenges, and thank you for pointing this out, Jay, that what the when it comes to talking about generative AI, we tend to default to the technology and what it does and explain it in very technical points of view. So that's the what and the how, but the why, the strategy, the purpose, the objectives, the creating the movement all comes back to why are we using these tools? So rolling up all those use cases, rolling up all the technology into this higher purpose of why we are going down this path and deciding to make all these changes and disrupt ourselves is so important in driving adoption and engagement. And Jay, just you're very welcome for the insight and the advice. So that's what I have for today. A couple quick announcements. Again, you can get the slides at my website, charlinglee.com/genai-comms. You can also, we're in the final trenches of finishing up the book. Katya and I are writing furiously. You can get updates at bit.ly/AI book dash updates. And from there, you can just sign up for the email and you get updates on when things are available. But you can also join, we'll send in that email confirmation, an opportunity to also join a LinkedIn community where we are doing more in-depth discussions. I'll be holding office hours with Katya and just having a lot of other things that are focused very much around some of the ideas in the book. And I'm taking a few weeks off. So I'll be traveling and I'll be back again in 3 weeks on a different day on Wednesday, June 10th at 9 o'clock, the usual time. And we're going to be discussing OKRs, objectives and key results, with the co-authors of a fantastic new book, Who Does What by How Much. And we'll be talking about how to develop specific OKRs for generative AI. And in particular, how do you make these OKRs adopted by every single person in the organization? So I'm really curious. These are two amazing people who are going to be talking and sharing their best learnings around how to develop measurements, and we'll be applying that to generative AI strategy. So I hope you will join that. All right. I think, oh, sorry. Yes, Jay, thank you. July 10th. I did not correct that. So it is July 10th that I'll be doing this. So join me again in 3 weeks. Thank you, Jay, for that quick catch. And thank you again. I'll be taking some much needed time off. And everybody who is in the US, enjoy the July 4th holidays. And I will catch you all on July 10th. Thanks.